For those of you with whom my path has not yet crossed, my name is Maria Hawkins, and I was Asa's favorite sister. Never mind the fact that I was his only sister, I was his favorite sister. I recently discovered a text from him that he sent just out of the blue one day, and all it said was, "I love you, big sis." It melted my heart, and I immediately just crumpled. For the most part, Asa usually called me Rhea, and I called him Squirt. And I was the only one that was allowed to call him that. Only my sister can call me that. He would tell people proudly anytime anyone else made an attempt. He didn't like it when I called him by his government name. He said it sounded just wrong. And I rarely ever called him Asa. I mainly only called him Asa if we were arguing or I really needed to get my point across. And there were a few times where Asa and Squirt were insufficient, and on those occasions, A-hole suited him best, but those were few and far between. Preparing for this trip was an emotionally tumultuous process. I live in Seattle because I kept encountering things that would make me go instinctually, oh, I gotta tell Asa that, or I gotta share that with Squirt. And I had to keep reminding myself that I wasn't coming to Texas to see him. I was coming to say goodbye. And then since being here at my parents' house, every time the landline rings, I got instinctively go, hey, that's Asa, tell him hi. And I don't know how long it's going to take me to break those habits. Now that we've gotten the introductory pleasantries out of the way, is everybody having a good time? I do recognize that this is a rather bizarre and morbid sentence to utter at a memorial service, so if you'll allow me to explain. Asa told me on several occasions, I'm going to put the fun back in funeral. And how exactly do you intend on doing that, I asked him. Am I supposed to get up there and ask everybody if they're having a good time? And he said, well, it'd be a good start. So let me regale you with a general synopsis of a conversation I had over the phone with my little brother about a half a dozen times or so. Asa, I think you should have my funeral at a strip club. Me, hard no. Asa, come on, it's my dying wish. Me, no. Asa, you're gonna deny me my dying wish? Just get some singles, Mom, by that I mean some single dollar bills. It's customary when you're at a strip club to, never mind. Asa, me, Asa, there's no way in hell I'm gonna go to a strip club with Dad, or Mom for that matter. No. Asa, come on, but I gotta put the fun back in funeral. Me, you are going to have to find another way. Asa, for me, come on, it's for me. I continued to emphatically shoot him down. Fine, he finally conceded. Whataburger then. I would like for all of my friends and family and loved ones to go to Whataburger, and everyone can sit around and talk about how awesome I was. Asa was so smart. Asa was so sexy. I'm not gonna call you sexy, I interjected. What? No, ew. Asa was so handsome, he tried to correct himself. Not gonna get me to say that either, I informed him. You don't think I'm handsome? He seemed very shocked. I think you're my little brother, and this conversation is getting weird. He laughed again. Okay, fine. So my loved ones will go to Whataburger and talk about how awesome I am, and nobody is allowed to cry. I told him I couldn't promise that either, so he came up with his next genius idea. If I have an open casket funeral, he said, don't let them put me in a suit, he demanded, because that's not me. That's not Asa. Make sure that they put me in a hot dog costume, but it can't be the one with the ketchup. It has to be the one with the mustard, only the mustard. That way, at the end, when everyone's getting in line to pay their respects, they'll get a surprise. It's Asa in a hot dog costume with the mustard, and nobody will be sad anymore. How could they be with Asa there at his own funeral in a hot dog costume with the mustard? They'll just laugh and go home. I told him I would do everything in my power to get him in a hot dog costume if there was an open casket, but I wasn't exactly sure how we were going to get a coffin into Whataburger. It might upset the other customers. He replied that Dad would just have to rent out Whataburger for the day. Then I pointed out that it would still be a health code violation. Man, why are you trying to ruin all my fun? I'm trying to put the fun back in funeral, and you're all over here with your logic and your valid reasons and stuff. You are taking the fun out of my funeral, Rhea. They say our siblings are our first real friendships, and that those are lifelong friendships. That was not necessarily the case for me and Asa. I sort of resented him when we were little. I think, and this may not be what actually happened, but as I recall, Mom and Dad dropped me off for my first day of kindergarten and were like, bye, we're taking your older brother Caleb to Montana to go pick up your new baby brother, Asa. You're staying with Grandma and Grandpa and your aunt and uncle. And in my 1 month shy of turning 6-year-old brain, I didn't really see why we needed another baby in the family. Caleb was handicapped and he wore diapers and was never going to outgrow them. So the way I saw it, we already had a perpetual baby brother. Adding another one to the mix would just mean 2 times the amount of stinky diapers to change. And picking him up meant they weren't going to be there to greet me after my first day of school ever. So instead of a good home-cooked meal after my very long, stressful half day of kindergarten, my first day of school ever, had to eat Grandpa's peanut butter and jelly and butter sandwiches. Butter to keep the peanut butter from sticking to the roof of your mouth. And they were gone for like 2 weeks, first 2 weeks of school ever, which is a really long time to an almost 6-year-old in a new town. So suffice it to say, I was not exactly thrilled about adding Asa to the family. I think I was also upset because we had almost adopted a baby girl prior to this move that had fallen through, and I really wanted a sister, and Asa was not a sister. So yeah, I was salty when he was born, and it only got worse because the first several years of his childhood because Asa was the favorite, and he knew it. And he would brag constantly about how he had mom and dad wrapped around his little finger, and he did. He got away with all sorts of stuff for the entirety of his life. He got mom and dad to jump through hoops that I wouldn't even dare ask for. It was as irritating as it was awe-inspiring. Asa was a very smart kid. He had a speech impediment and was dyslexic, but he was not dumb by any means. There was one time when he was really little and Mom had taken us, we had just moved and Mom took us to the grocery store and she got turned around on the way home and Asa from the back seat was like, Mom, turn up there. And she was kind of hesitant. He goes, no, just turn up there. And so she turned and then he step by step, he got her all the way home. He was no older than 4 or 5 at the time. He had this just innate sense of direction that I'm still envious of today. It was just in his DNA. Asa and I would bicker a lot, as siblings do. He liked to clown on my forehead, or as he called it, my 5 head, and my big teeth, and I clowned on his big ears and his nose. And we did that all the way up until, right before he died. It was just what siblings do, and something we would laugh about as adults. He loved to bring up the time that I cut his knuckles with my braces when he punched my teeth. I cut him. It was always my fault. And Dad, I'm pretty sure that was the same incident when we accidentally broke the fence in front of the house because I had my backpack on. Sorry about that. And then our parents decided to homeschool Asa for just middle school, and then we're going to put him back in public school for high school. And I thought this was a colossally bad idea because junior high is where he developed socially, and I didn't want him to enter high school being labeled a homeschooler because back then it had a really negative connotation amongst us kids. So I took him under my wing. I made him a CD of all the songs that I felt he might be expected to know in life, like Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, Stairway to Heaven, Friends in Low Places, Passenger by the Deftones and Maynard. I'm the reason that he loved 10 Things I Hate About You, and years later, he would be the reason that I came to love Devil Wears Prada. And it was during those years that Asa and I grew very close. It was during those years that I began to really get to know him and see him as something less of a brat and more of an actual person, and an amazing person at that. For example, when Asa was about 9, he got these 2 goldfish, Jupiter and Pluto. Well, he didn't have Pluto for very long because Jupiter ate Pluto. So then he just had Jupiter. But Asa decided he wanted to raise the world's longest living goldfish, which this is before Google, so we just thought it was like 13 or 14 years or so. And when Jupiter was about 3 or so, Asa called me distraught because Jupiter was very sick and he didn't know what to do and Mom wouldn't take him to the vet. So I jumped online and I don't forget what was wrong with him, but I did some research and I found some suggestions and I gave them to Asa, and sure enough, Jupiter made a full recovery. And it was during that time that we discovered that the world's longest living goldfish was actually 43 years. And any other 11-year-old would have been like, okay, I'm done, but not Asa. He was like, okay, 40 more years to go, And I was so impressed by and in awe of the tenacity and willingness to adjust his goal. There's some disagreement by my parents and me about how old Jupiter was when he passed. I think he was at least 8 or 9. My dad doesn't think he was quite that old, but he was old enough that when he died that he was not flushed, he was buried in the backyard. So that tells me he was around for a while. And then for my birthday one year, there was a knock at my bedroom door, and when I opened it, there was nobody there. What was there was one of those giant Coca-Cola bottles. They're ones that are over 6 feet tall that you generally see plugged in at a gas station with a large opening for Cokes and ice and melting ice. And he had hatched a plan with a few of his friends, and somebody had distracted the clerk at the gas station just outside the neighborhood. One of them cut the cord, and they wheeled this thing right outside that tiny door and across the very busy street and down into the neighborhood all the way to the house, and it just left it outside my door for my 17th or 18th birthday. So Asa was 11 or 12, probably. I don't honestly remember how our parents reacted to that thing appearing at the house, but I can't imagine they were particularly thrilled about it. I loved it. I don't know if you noticed at the end of my video, there's an image of a 21-year-old me and a cat, and the Coca-Cola bottle, that was what that was. It's the only picture I could find of it. But as you can see, it wasn't a 20-ounce bottle that you could just slip in your jacket. I crack up every time I picture them pushing it across that really busy street, just down into the neighborhood, over the dip and everything, in the Texas or late August or to early September heat at that. That right there is a tenacity and only the beginning of all the ways that Asa was demonstrably an awesome brother. He got really into BMX racing around his teenage years. There was one time he had a very particularly horrific wreck. My dad said that he hit the ground and that he bounced. He broke several ribs and his collarbone, and they sent him home from the hospital. And then the next morning they called and said, bring him back, he has a punctured lung. And he had gone home with a punctured lung and hadn't complained at all. He was incredibly resilient. He was easily one of the biggest kids in his sport. And he had a bike that he absolutely loved. He worked really hard mowing lawns and doing odds and end jobs for the neighbors to build that bike. Probably spent over a grand on it. And then after the accident, the day before the doctor cleared him to ride his bike again, someone broke in and stole Asa's bike. He was devastated. To say that he was devastated is an understatement. He was absolutely crushed, and it broke my heart. A few years after high school, I got a lead role in a community theater play. It was the only one I ever got paid, acting gig I ever got paid for. And Asa paid to come see it 3 times. He was so proud of me, and that meant the world to me. Asa didn't have the easiest childhood. He was in the room with our oldest brother, Caleb, when he passed, and he was just 9 at the time, and I know that impacted him deeply. And he suffered some other horrific ordeals that I didn't learn about until recently, and I won't detail them here, but they were things no child should ever have to be subjected to. The types of things that profoundly changed Asa and his outlook on life and introduced him to experiences that no one should ever have to encounter so young. So suffice it to say that when I attempted to take my own life in my early 20s, Asa was the first person I called, because I knew that he was familiar with the mental health facilities in the area, and he sat with me until I was admitted, even during my intake interview. He later made fun of me for using polysyllabic words during my mental health screening when I was, quote, messed up out of my mind, he said. Asa was fiercely loyal, he was resilient, hands down one of the most naturally funny people I have ever known in my entire life. He lived life on his own terms, and he died on his own terms, and I really admire that about him. The last time I came home to Texas was 2 years ago for the funeral of my best friend since the 6th grade. Asa heard I was in town and why I was here, and he sought me out at my hotel room, and he came and he stayed with me through the viewing, the funeral, and even to my best friend's family's house, so I wouldn't have to do it alone. And that meant the world to me. It was the first time we'd hung out like that in over a decade. And the whole time we were hanging out, he kept telling me repeatedly that this is probably the last time you'll ever see me alive. And he was right. And he kept saying, it's okay, it'll be okay, Rhea. I said, yeah, for you, because you won't be here anymore. And he said, no, it'll be okay, I'm ready, it'll be okay. My brother was unabashedly himself, and he was practically fearless. He was quite the accomplished and prolific shoplifter, with one of his proudest conquests being an entire rotisserie chicken. Being 6'5" and drunk, that's a really big feat, in my opinion. He was very proud of that. He had his vices and attempted to fight his addictions tooth and nail with every fiber of his being. Unfortunately, his addictions were just stronger. But he certainly tried. He only had one major fear and one major regret. His biggest fear was that his son, Trevor, would find alcohol and fall into the same path as him. He was terrified of that. He was genuinely terrified that he had passed on his addiction to his son. And his greatest regret was that he was never able to be the father that Trevor very much needed and deserved. I carry so much guilt about my son, Rhea. It eats me up inside constantly, he told me. In some ways, I think he felt that he could be a better father if he simply wasn't here, constantly letting his son down for not being able to be present. And I know that's a warped way to think, but on some level, I think I can understand where he was coming from. He constantly repeated this mantra about how it's the quality of life and not the quantity of the years that matter. And I guess that worked for him, but I personally would give anything to have a few more years with my baby brother. Because there is now this Asa-shaped hole in my heart, and in my parents' hearts, and in the hearts of many others that will probably never fully heal. And I just realized I'm doing the exact opposite of what Asa wanted in this service, which is to put the fun back in funeral. I really don't know what he expected me to do. I thought about getting up here and doing my eulogy with a balloon full of helium, but Dad and I decided that might be poor decorum, so I thought about getting a hot dog onesie, but then I remembered it's June in Texas. Sorry, Squirt, I really did try to think of something to make your funeral fun. What I think you didn't understand is that I've forgotten what fun means since losing you. This world is a significantly darker place without you in it. You have no idea just how bright a light your existence was in the lives of so many people, even perfect strangers. You were so funny, so charming, so charismatic, and yeah, even handsome. Thank you.